Bashem, Hashem, Elohei Yisrael, Mimini Michael, Umismoli Gabriel, Umilfanai Uriel, Meachorai Raphael, Ve'al Roshi, Shechinatel. Yirinai, rai, rai, yirinai, rai, rai. Nai, 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 nai. Nai, 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 nai. Nai, 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 nai. Ini nai, 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 ani nai, nai, nai. Yani nai, 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 nai. Nini nai, 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 yani nai, nai, nai. Yani nai, 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 nai.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Elise, and I'm Wilderness Torah's Special Projects Coordinator. And I want to introduce myself and welcome you to Virtual Village. In response to these uncertain times and the unfortunate cancellation of our annual Passover in the Desert Festival, we decided to use all this energy to create Virtual Village. As part of awakening the earth-based traditions of Judaism, Wilderness Torah creates village life during our immersive land-based festivals, such as Passover in the Desert, by uplifting and encouraging the individual gifts of the collective community. 4 times a week in this virtual village, you will learn with Wilderness Torah community members who are sharing their gifts, as well as longtime stakeholders in the earth-based Judaism movement. Thank you all for being here with us. We're excited to have you all as part of our village. I'm gonna look at gallery view because I'm curious if anyone who it's their first Wilderness Torah program, if you could raise your hand. Awesome, welcome. And if this is your first virtual village program, can you raise your hand too? So we've got some newcomers here. Thank you for joining us. We are committed to keeping Virtual Village accessible and free. If you would like to support Wilderness Torah in this effort, we welcome any and all donations, large or small, as we endeavor to provide Jewish wisdom and community building through this hard time. If you are new to Wilderness Torah or would like to find out more about what we do and how to get involved, my peer Malka will put the link to our website and donation page in the chat now. This session is being recorded and is live streamed to Facebook. We will be uploading recorded sessions to our website, so check back on our website for those. And now we'll say hello to Rabbi Zelig Golden. Rabbi Zelig Golden received the rabbinic ordination from Aleph, holds a master's in Jewish studies from the Graduate Theological Union, and is co-founder and executive director of Wilderness Torah. Thank you, Zelig. Take it away.
Thank you, Sarah-Lise, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here together, albeit virtually. It is a great paradox for Wilderness Torah to be doing this online through Zoom, because Wilderness Torah does all of our programs in person with the intent to really cultivate connection relational education, we call it. And so, these virtual sessions that we're offering are trying to squeeze the juice out of what, the ikar, the essence of what the Wilderness Torah community has to offer and the Earth-Based Judaism movement as a whole. And today I'm excited to dive into a topic that is dear to my heart, and that is the four winds. And so I'd love to begin by just seeing if anyone here would like to say why, in like 1 to 3 sentences max. Why did you come here to this session? What about the four winds is interesting to you? And I saw Rebecca's mom. Yeah, I'm sorry. Tell us your name and unmute Rebecca over there. Tell us your name and why you came to this session.
My name is Ilana, although you could also just call me Rivka if we were in Arabic. But I'm curious because I've never heard of the four directions, and I know a fair amount of Judaism. I know you mentioned it last week, so I was curious about learning more.
Rivka, and you were the inspiration for this class, just so you know. So great. And anyone else want to chime in? Why are you here in this particular class?
Okay. I think a lot of you know Jonathan first.
Yes.
And I'm his mom.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to him today and he said, don't miss Zelig's talk. So that's why I'm here.
Oh, so great to have you. Welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there a third that would want to share their impetus for coming? And your name too, if you do. Okay, well, that's great. It's great to have you all here. My impetus for coming is that I am inspired to understand the ancestral relationship to the natural world. But the ancestral relationship to the natural world for me is sort of a gateway into my own personal relationship to the natural world, as well as to my own awakening of my spirit, of awakening of my soul, with an understanding that I came here, just as each one of us comes here, I believe, with a purpose, that the Creator gives us innate gifts, and that we're put on earth to, you might say, to serve those gifts into the world. And I believe there are powers that conspire to support us in understanding our gifts and then to sharing those gifts. I deeply believe that because I've experienced that. And so today is about connecting to the four winds as archetypal energies or powers that support us. Now, if we look at any earth-based culture across the planet, any tribal culture, essentially, you're going to see the four winds or the four directions show up. Every native tradition in native community in North America, for example, have an orientation to the four directions. Many communities pray in the four directions, and they are all different. They're all variable. But what is true is that when we are in relationship to spirit, and we are in relationship to the natural world, we begin to orient ourselves. So today might be a class on orientation. Orientation within the taproot of the Hebraic or Jewish tradition. And I don't want to stop there. I want to say that it must be for us to make this about our own personal spiritual experience, our own personal awakening, or might I say our own sense of resilience, our own sense of self-empowerment. And that's what the virtual village is really all about building resilience in this time. It must come alive. So today's going to be very intellectual, but it's the underpinning for how to bring this alive. So we have a source sheet, and I'm happy to share it now, and perhaps it can be shared repeatedly throughout, but I just put it in the chat. So you can go to this source sheet now and look at it. I'll also share my screen, so I'll show it, and you can have this source sheet afterwards to review any material you want. So I'm now going to share my screen and bring us into the first bit of text. So as we did in our first class on Earth-Based Judaism, we're going to begin at the beginning in Genesis. And the Torah says, Vayitzar Hashem Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama v'yipach be'apav nishmat chayim v'hi adama l'nefesh chay. And the Creator and God formed the earthling Adam from the dust of the earth, Adama, noting again the relationship between Adam, the earthling, and Adama, the earth, that we are one and the same. The human beings are of the earth. We come from the earth and we return back to the earth when we die. So that relationship is the beginning of understanding. But that then the Creator blows the breath of life into the earthling, and the earthling comes to life. So we are of the earth, but there is a breathing into life. And then it says that the Creator planted the earthling, planted a Garden of Eden in the east, and planted there the earthling who it had formed. So our first taste of the directions, that the Garden of Eden is planted in the east. Now, I'm wondering if anyone might want to take a shot at what the Torah means that the Garden of Eden was planted in the east. No right or wrong answer, only like your own connection to this. Yeah, Hannah. Unmute Hannah.
Well, the sun rises in the east, and the garden's very much a primordial beginning for us. And so there's likely a connection there in some respect.
Beautiful. So you're orienting towards now the directions of what's actually happening in the world, which I'm really excited about because that's where I want to go too. And that the east is the place of the rising sun. There it is in this beautiful image. The sun rises in the east, and this is where new beginnings occur. Pesach is our spring festival. And you could say that in a sense in the calendar, Pesach and the month of Nisan is the sunrise of the Hebrew calendar. It's a time of awakening and liberation, just as it's the time of awakening inside the natural cycle, the emergence of spring. That's why we put the greens on the Seder plate. It's one of the ritual orientations that it's a spring festival, but it's also the time of liberation, awakening, or our birth. And so too in the Garden of Eden in the east, it's the place of our birth, the birth of humanity. Now, if you go online and look up Garden of Eden in the east, you'll see that there are attempts to like name where the Garden of Eden physically was in the map of the Middle East. And I think it's more like what Hannah's saying, that it's a mythical east, which gets us to start to understand the directions as physical places from where we are, but also as energetic qualities. And so if we look at just the basic wheel, and now to note, this is a northern hemispheric orientation. The Hebraic tribal culture is a northern hemispheric culture, just as we are here in Turtle Island in North America, or wherever you're from. But if you're in Australia or Africa or Antarctica or South America, it's gonna flip on its head. So just to note that this is a very specific to the region in which you're in. And here we can see that the east is the sunrise, as Hannah said, and it's the place of awakening. Mizrach is the Hebrew word, the shining place, when that first burst of light comes, the first burst of life. In the south, Darom. Darom means the highest point in the sky. So now it's describing the trajectory of the sun. So as an indigenous language, Hebrew is describing through the description of the directions where the sun is going. And in the west, Marav, where the sun then blends back in to the horizon and the sky turns from that bright blue to purple. And then to north, Safon, when the sun is hidden. Safon means hidden, just like Safun. In our Passover Seder, we hide the Afikomen. Safon, north, is the hidden place or mysterious place. It's when the sun is no longer there, and that's why we see the stars. So even in our very language, begin to see the four directions being elucidated. Now we're going to look a little bit into some of the mystical texts. And I want to bring you into the Zohar. The Zohar is the most likely written around the 13th century. We don't know its author, although it's attributed to Shimon Bar Yochai, which we'll celebrate in 12 days on Lag BaOmer. And the holy fire of Lag BaOmer is about the mystical awakening when Shimon Bar Yochai brought his teachings, although it's very anachronistic in timing. But the Zohar is a poetic, mystical commentary on the Torah, and in it is fantastic insights into the world, and it's the foundation of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism. And in the Zohar, in the second book of the Zohar, it says, for when Adam was created, it was composed of the earth. And this is the terrestrial temple, the Zohar says, which is Malchut. Malchut, the word in Hebrew means like kingdom or queendom. This is the earth, the Malchut space. By the way, today is Malchut Shabbat Tiferet. We're in the 21st day of the Omer, so it's a perfect day to be discussing the Zohar on Malchut, which is the manifestation in the world of the qualities that we're describing. And the four directions of the world were joined to that place called the temple. These four directions joined in four aspects, which are the elements of fire, air, water, and earth. And the four directions joined the four elements. So I'm going to pause the screen and just ask, now you're looking at a depiction of the four directions. And the Zohar is saying that the four directions are somehow conspiring to manifest Malchut, the earth space that we're in, and not directly connecting to the four elements, fire, air, water, and earth. And I'm wondering if anyone has any insight or thought about this before we move on. I don't want to move too fast. Sarah, Elise?
I think my question got sent to the wrong space, but I was asking Marav for the West, is that the same root as Mariv? Like how? Great.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes. So Marav is one of the words for West, and it's it literally means blending. But Mariv, same root, means evening. So in the West, everywhere in the world is where the sun sets, and that's where the sun blends in when we go into evening. So it's a beautiful connection. And Rachel Chedor-Reich, I think tuning in from Oregon, is saying, this is so cool, it's in our tradition. Well, let me say, it's going to get cooler, so let's continue on. I'm going to share screen and continue on some of these sources, because I think it's really cool too. I get obsessed with this stuff, because my intuition has always been that Judaism is such a deep earth-based tradition. And when we start digging into our ancient texts, it's amazing how much so it is. So we're going to go to the Zohar. The next verse, essentially, going to riff again. It says, in these four, under these, there are similar metals. Come and see similar metals. So now we're talking about refining from elements into metals. So the Zohar is talking about the creation of the world, and how the creation of the world begins with the etheric spiritual forces and then starts to manifest into the physical reality. And that's what the Sfirot are doing. That's what the Omer counting is all about. And here we're going to see a valence of that. These four, fire, air, water, and earth, correspond to the four directions and are situated in these four, north, south, east, and west, which are the four directions, and the four elements abide in them. Fire is in the north. Air is in the east. Water is in the south. Earth is in the west. And these four, fire, air, water, and earth, are connected to the four, north, south, east, and west, and they are all one. So here we have a paradox. They're four, but they're one, and they produce four metals: gold, silver, brass, and iron. Now, this goes on into other dimensions that we're not going to continue on to, for it becomes complicated. But now the Zohar is telling us that there's an orientation that the powers of the four directions have, elementally. And I want to pause here. And I want to make a very important observation, and I think also disclaimer. There's a tendency that I've noticed inside myself, and I've seen this in others, that when we start drawing circles and medicine wheels. Here's an example. We very much want to fix where different things land in the directions so we can really understand. And the Zohar is giving us fire in the north, air in the east, water in the south, and earth in the west. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful insight. And there are other places that we're not going to go today in the Torah and other ancient scripts that are going to put the elements in different places. So the question, and we're going to see this later with the angels. So why is that they aren't the same? And I want to say that developing an understanding of the four winds or the four directions, or in the Mayan tradition, there's hundreds of directions, right? Because it's actually an infinite circle. You can look in any direction. But in Judaism, like other traditions, it archetypalizes into four, probably for simplicity because of the power that people perceive there. But that these are not fixed. That these energies are real, I believe, and that they're there to build a relationship. So I want to invite us for a moment. This is the uncomfortable part for some and the exciting part for others. I want us to back away from the computer just like 6 or 12 inches, or just energetically, and go inside. Close your eyes if you're comfortable. And erase what the Zohar has told you about the fire in the north. Like, don't think of the pink elephant, of the fire in the north, the air in the east. But let's just attune and ask yourself this question: which direction are you facing right now? What direction are you facing? And what's your relationship to that direction? And if you want to turn a little bit so you're facing a specific direction, choose your own adventure here, but what is your relationship to the direction you're facing right now? Do you have a relationship to that direction? And now if you're comfortable, I'd like you to move your body so that you are facing the east. Don't need to move your computer, just if you want to, that's fine. I'm going to orient my body to the east. Make sure you know which way east is. Now, most of us are indoors, so it's maybe a little more challenging, but nonetheless, we still can know which direction is east. And if you don't know which direction is east, just take a guess, and then this will be inspiration to learn. And then go inside again and feel the energy of the east to the best of your ability. Facing east, where's the sun right now? Facing east, what do you feel in your body? And I invite you to turn now to the south by taking a quarter turn to your right, sunwise, as it were. And try the same thing. Facing the south, what do you feel in the south? What is your relationship to the south? Any thoughts or insights come? Any feelings come? Now I want to invite you to return back to the temple of our computers. And we didn't go to the west and the north. We didn't look to the sky of the earth. We didn't look to the center. We could say there's 7 directions. We could say there's southeast, southwest. There's 8 directions. We could go on and on. But just a taste. Did anyone feel something in either the east or the south? Like, ooh, that I want to remember that. I want to share that. Anyone want to share a simple insight? Yeah, I see a hand. Marilyn Canduce.
When I faced the east, I felt the beginning. I felt the beginning of things. I love the mornings, and I love watching the moon rise, and just that that hopefulness that comes from the beginning of each day and the beginning of each night.
Thank you so much. So I heard beginning and hope, and there's so much more that I'm sure you could share. And perhaps one other person want to share, something from the East or the South. Pat, yeah.
The East, anticipation.
Anticipation in the East.
Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. So here's a taste of the East, just from our own personal insights in less than a minute. Imagine if we spent a day together and we did that and just spent like 3 hours facing each direction, tuning in. Or daily prayer, tuning into those directions. Well, I'll show you later where we might do that. And for now, we're gonna tune back into our source sheet. And we're going to go to an individual, not unlike ourselves, a human being, albeit from ancient days. And this person's name was Ezekiel. Ezekiel is one of the prophets, one of the great prophets. And the story of Ezekiel. Would somebody mind reading, starting from one with just a clear voice? Anyone who feels, jump in and read from Ezekiel.
We lost your text a little bit. There it is. Again, can you zoom in a tiny bit, Zelig?
I'm going to dive in then. In the 13th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, when I being Ezekiel, was in the community of exiles. So Ezekiel is in exile away from Jerusalem, presumably. It says Chabar, but it's Kafar, canal. So it's in Hebrew, it says Nahar Kafar. And Kafar means already, meaning like it's already there. And Nahar is really a river. So it's the river of already. So Ezekiel is sitting by a mystical river. And in this moment, probably meditating, because Ezekiel's a mystic and a prophet, the heavens opened, I saw visions of God. I'm going to continue to the third line. The word of God came to the priest, the word of God came to the Ezekiel, and I looked, and lo, a stormy wind. Now notice that the vision comes on a wind, and this vision comes from the north. So we need not conclude that vision comes from the north, although we can conclude that Ezekiel's vision comes from the north. So it's an insight about the north. And the vision is a huge cloud and flashing fire surrounded by radiance. And in the center of it, the center of the fire, a gleam of amber. And the center of it were also the figures of 4 creatures. And this was their appearance. They had the figures of human beings, each with 4 faces and 4 wings. The legs were rigid legs, and the feet were like hooves, and their sparkle was like the luster of bronze. They had human hands below their wings. The 4 of them had faces, and their wings on the 4 sides. And now we touch on the 4 sides. Each can move in the direction of any of its faces, and each of them, all 4, had a human face in the front. Each of them had the face of a lion on the right. Each had the face of an ox on the left, and each had the face of an eagle in the back. Now here is an image of an artistic depiction of Ezekiel's vision. Now notice the 4, the lion, the human, the ox, and the eagle. Some scholars, such as Gershon Winkler in his seminal book, Magic of the Ordinary, has positioned these 4 in 4 directions, putting the lion in the east, and the human in the south, and the ox in the west, and the eagle in the north. Why? It's not totally clear. The Lion of Judah is, and we'll see later, the tribes, the Judah resides in the east, and the lion is Judah's totem, and that lion you'll see on the east gate of Jerusalem. So perhaps using that totemic symbology and its orientation, one could fix these 4 and then say, as they oriented, the lion is in the east, and the human in the south, and the ox in the west, and the eagle in the north. However, the text is unclear. So it's left for our understanding that Ezekiel saw these four faces and these animals in the four directions. And there's a power there that he's connecting to in this vision. We could spend a huge amount of time looking at Ezekiel's vision, but I want to give you the taste, and I want to move on to another vision, another great prophet, the prophet of Daniel. Daniel comes a bit later, and Daniel is his vision that we're going to see here, along with Ezekiel's vision, become the fodder for the Heicha mystical literature, the ascension literature, which is deeply Kabbalistic. And these foundational four-directional dreams give insight into our relationship to the four winds, but also to these four directions as foundations for our mystical tradition and our very spiritual tradition. So in the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, so again, Daniel's in exile, as are the prophets, Daniel related the following: in my vision at night, I saw the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. So here we have the four winds appearing. And in these four winds, four mighty beasts, different from each other. The first was a lion eagle. It was a lion, but had eagle's wings. Then I saw a different second beast, which was like a bear, but raised on one side, had fangs in its mouth. After that, I looked, and there was another one, a leopard, and it had wings on its back. So it's a winged leopard. And it had multiple heads. And after that, I looked on the night vision. There was a fourth beast, fearsome, dreadful, and powerful, with great iron teeth that devoured and crushed and stamped the remains with its feet. It was different from all the beasts which had gone before, and it had 10 horns. Whew. So we just tapped into Ezekiel's vision with the four faces, and then Daniel's vision with the four animals from the four winds. And I just want to pause and say, have any reflections about these visions that these humans had? Elizabeth, let's see. You're unmuted, Elizabeth.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, there's just a great curiosity in me about that last beast and how it stamped the remains. What's the meaning of that? What were the remains? And I don't know. It's big curiosity.
Thank you. So what I would say, I'm curious too, and we don't have necessarily perfect answers, but what we have is these windows into these ancient prophets who had these experiences and that are codified in our ancient texts. And these archetypes show up. In the case of Ezekiel's vision, it's the lion and the human and the ox and the eagle. And then in Ezekiel's vision, it's this image that I'm sharing here on my screen, a bear and a lion eagle and a multi-winged leopard and this 10-horned monster that's crushing. And these are, you could say that they both saw physical beings, or we could also see that they're being shown archetypal energies from these four winds. And this makes me curious to know, does anyone feel compelled to share about a personal experience, having contacted the archetypal energies, maybe one of them from one of these directions? Because what I would say too about the prophets, including Moses, who's the greatest of the great, Ezekiel and Daniel are like the Hechalot mystic foundation. They're the progenitors of Jewish mysticisms. They're great beings, but I believe deeply that all human beings inherently have the capacity to build relationships with these energies and powers, be it God in general, or the angelic realms that are sort of like the fractalized expressions of God, the archetypes that are expressed through the God field. fire, water, air, and earth, lion, leopard, bear, and beast, ox, eagle, human, or on and on. And perhaps, someone here has a profound relationship with the hummingbird who comes to you from the east, or dolphin totem, that came to you from the west. Now, remember that Ezekiel and Daniel are not in Jerusalem, are not even in that land. They're in exile. They're very far east now, in Iraq, in Babylon. And so we have to really recognize, well, they've been exiled from their tribal root. They're in a different region, and they're having a very personal experience at a very personal time. So the crushing, stamped and crushing the remains, if you go into the rest of Daniel's vision, you know that he's having a vision at a very difficult time in Jewish history, in the tribe of Israel, having been exiled. So there's an archetype coming to Daniel for the time. Maybe that's not the archetype for our time, but that it's important to see that these four winds are messengers of sacred power, I would say. So with that, I want to turn to Amy, who might have an experience to share.
I don't know. I was going to ask or comment on the exile aspect of this. I mean, they have these visions when they're in exile and they're struggling with exile. So do you think there's a relationship between you just said it, but then I was thinking about it, like what they saw grew out of being in exile?
Yes, I mean, I think that I think it's essential for me. My understanding is that in my own personal relationship with the powers that are available, that it's contextual, it's personal as well as transpersonal. So the West, for me, I live in California. I'm on the West Coast of the United States. I'm not that far from the ocean. So the West, for me, connotes the ocean. There's a power of water and cleansing. Similar for the Hebraic, ancient root, because in Jerusalem and in ancient Israel, we are, the ocean is to our west. Yam, it's right there. And to the east is Jordan, and the Jordan River, and to the south is the great deserts. So although the Zohar put fire in the north, there are other mystical traditions that will put fire in the south because of the Negev and the association of the cleansing fires of the great desert of the Negev. So it's very contextual. And what I'm trying to inspire us to think about isn't the specifics of Daniel's vision, Ezekiel's vision, or even Amy's vision, although I want to inspire Amy to have your own relationship, but that these powers are actually available to us and very deeply rooted in our tradition. So I'm open for one more comment before we move forward. Okay. Thanks, Amy, for asking that question. Great. So now we're going to turn towards another example of where the four directions just keep showing up. Now we're talking about God itself and the mystical conception of the power of God. And we're in the Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah is probably our oldest mystical text that we have. Authorship also not clear, predates the Zohar by centuries. And here in the Zohar is saying that he, and now they're talking about the creator, and it's a very old text, so it's using the pronoun he, but in my view, he, it would be better to say, the one, or Yah. If you go to the Hebrew, it's actually not specifying, so it's but the one selected 3 letters from the simple ones and sealed them in forming his great name, Yud He Wah. So what is it referring to? It's referring to the tetragrammaton, the actual 4-letter name of God. which is Yud He Vav He. Now it's taking the 3 root letters of Yud He and Vav He and saying, okay, there's Yud He and Wa. These are the simple ones, meaning these are the foundational letters of creation found in the 4-letter name, and sealed the universe in 6 directions. He looked up and sealed the height, looked below and sealed the deep. Then he looked forward and sealed the east with He Yud Vav. Looked backwards and sealed the west with He Vav Yud. Looked to the right and sealed the south with Vav Yud He, and sealed the north, the left, with Vav He Yud. Now, this is a koan, or a puzzle. What is the Sefer Yetzirah? Sefer Yetzirah, by the way, literally means the book of creation. So this is describing the creation of the world, this mystical manual, very old. But the gist here is that the Sefer Yetzirah is describing that it is creating or observing a universe that is created, a field created by the letters that come out of the name of God, so that the universe that we see and experience, that has, here is describing 6 directions, are permuted by these different letters of God. So what does this mean to you? Why would, for example, each direction have a different permutation of the 3 simple letters? I'm seeing Adria. Can someone unmute Adria, please? Sarah, Elise, can you unmute Adria?
Oh, okay, good. Wait a second. Hold on. Okay. I think that it's almost like giving a formula of creation. I'm wondering if it sort of encouraged magicians. You know, it really kind of, okay, here's a formula. What can someone do with that formula? Either, and it could be in a sort of a material way, but also it could be in a spiritual way, like to focus on the letters. And, you know, some people have done it's almost like correlation with the body parts, like the He is the arms and the legs, and the Yud is the top, and the Vav is the long spinal energy, so that one could even embody that formula as well, you know, in a mystical way.
Beautiful, thank you. So it could be a formula either as a prescription or as an observation. And Sarah Lee said in the chat that it's perhaps it's different kinds of breath, because Rabbi Arthur Waskow, one of his beautiful and core teachings, is the 4-letter name of God, the Yud He Vav He. It's an impossible name to pronounce, and that's why we say Adonai. And we see Adonai, the English translation of Yud He Vav He. It's not that at all. There's no Dalet or D in the Yud He Vav He. So why are we saying Adonai? It's really a proxy or a placeholder, because we don't actually have the capacity to say that word, or we've been taught to be careful in saying that word because it's too close. But Rabbi Arthur Waskow say, it's Yah. It's, you know, he's encouraging us to breathe. And again, 4 winds, 4 letters. So we're now beginning to connect the dots. The 4 winds are these powers of creation, at once one thing, but yet 4 things, and many infinite things, but 4 archetypal things. Yah. And here they're those 4 simple letters, the 3 simple letters of the 4-letter name are being permuted, because each direction has its own nature, its own character. And I see a hand raised by Daniel Barchenko. Why don't you jump in there, Daniel?
Cool. Am I unmuted? Great.
Yep, you're good.
Yeah, what came up for me was the like parallels with DNA, and how this is a code for creation and like the building blocks of life. And if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I took DNA, you know, genetic biology course, but pretty sure that's just 4 letters as well. That's like the building blocks of life.
Nice. I took genetics in college, and I can't remember if it's for adenosine, glyphosine. I don't remember them either. But yes, I think that you're touching on something that feels. I had chills, which for me in my body means I'm resonating with what you're saying. In that, what the mystics say in Judaism, and I think it's probably universal across mystical traditions, that so above as below, that the microcosm is a reflection of macrocosmic reality. So the DNA is a fractal of the larger pattern, and that the Sefer Yetzirah is attempting to articulate that pattern. Now, whether it's articulating that pattern correctly or not, we won't know for sure. But I think it's at least a finger pointing at a reality that Danielle is saying, and that is something about God and the greater cosmic forces that are at play inside of ourselves. It's a map. And so Amy raised her hand. We'll go to Amy, and then we're gonna move on. So I thank you for that, Danielle. That was a beautiful insight.
That was really good. And it made me, so in that passage that you read, it said that he chose the 3 simplest letters, right?
Yeah.
So that means there was all these other letters floating around that weren't so simple.
Yeah, there's the whole Hebrew alphabet. There's 22 of them. And I don't know why Yud, which represents 10, and Hey, which represents 5, and Vav, which represents 6. We could go into a deep study of why those are considered the simple letters. But what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that there's these 22 letters floating around, right? And the person, the being, whoever, the Great Spirit, chose these 3 letters, which are breath, which are the code for creation. It's like, okay, it's all just,
yeah,
it's things are, I think, okay, so what I'm getting from that is that things can be very simple in their complexity, and we need to remember that.
I want to say amen to Amy saying things can be very simple in their complexity. And what I would say about that is we won't have time to sort of unpack the mother letters and how that relates to the elements, but there's a whole architecture that the Sefer Yetzirah is pointing to. And if you're curious, you can get the Sefer Yetzirah in translation by Aryeh Kaplan. If you want to go deeper and look at it also has the original language. And then it shows Aryeh Kaplan's insights. So you can go into the Sefer Yetzirah, but we only have 10 minutes left, I'm being told. And so we won't go too deep into the Sefer Yetzirah, but just to kind of touch on the profound complexity of the universe and the mystics trying to understand that through an orientation with our letters and the elements and the directions. And it's so simple. And I want to really come back to that, because what is so simple is that ultimately none of this is necessary, in my view, to understand, but my hope is that it's inspiration for you to go out and experience. So go out and sit with the East. I know I am. I'm at home a lot right now. And back to the resiliency piece, there's something about locating ourselves in time and space, especially in space, that is deeply grounding to our energetic systems. And if you build a relationship with the East, meaning perhaps each morning wake up and go out and just watch the sunrise. And while the sun is rising, listen to what the bird song is happening, If if you turn to the south in the middle of the day and notice where the sun is, you'll be facing the sun way high in the sky. It's powerful. Contact that power. In the West, when the sun is setting, you see where I'm going. And if we build a relationship with these energies, at first they will be simple and maybe not so easy to understand. But I imagine that based on my experience, each of us will begin to develop a deeper and deeper relationship. And we be able to write our own versions of these manuals because we have the human capacity to connect deeply. Okay. So with that, I'm gonna touch on a few more things because it continues deepening. And the place I want to show you is how then, with all this mystical architecture, the Jewish tradition instructs us. There are some instructions in our tradition. So in Exodus, we are now in the desert, having been liberated from Egypt, and we're in the the desert, and not that long ago we read about the Mishkan, the wandering tabernacle, and how we as a people were called upon by the Creator to design the Mishkan. And it says in Exodus 26:35, place the table outside the curtain and the lampstand by the south wall of the tabernacle, which is to be placed by the north wall. So we're given an orientation, like the lampstand, which is the menorah where the fire is being held inside the curtain of the Mishkan. It's in the south. Why? Because the fire is in the south. Okay, contradicting the Zohar where fire is in the north, but that's what the Exodus is telling us. And you can see the architecture here. That the table is in the north, and there's another place in the Torah it says to put the bread, the offering bread, the showbread in the north, and the menorah in the south. The entrance is in the east, and in between is the altar of incense. And to the west of all this is the Ark and the Holy of Holies. And that is the orientation in the four directions. And we have a whole architecture for this. And so we could go deep into why is the bread in the north? Why is the menorah in the south? And we're not going to do that now because of, again, I'm touching on these pieces. And then it shows us that as a tribe, we are to orient ourselves around this Mishkan in a very specific form. It's a long piece of Torah from Numbers. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says the Creator spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, the tribes of Israel shall camp, each with his standard, their symbols, their banners, and they shall camp around the tent of meeting. And camped in front or the east at the entrance is Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. On the south is Reuben. These are tribes, by the way. Gad, and where's the third? Simeon. Sorry, I skipped over Simeon. In the west is Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And in the north is Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. And you can see here the tribes oriented around the Mishkan, with Dan being in the north. So actually the lower right-hand side, this is the north in this image, which is an interesting way. You can see here the west. So you have Dan, Asher, Naphtali, etc. So the tribes are now located in specific directions with the priests at the center. Now we could go deep into the lore of the tribes and why do we orient them around the tabernacle. But what we do know is that later when we enter into the land, these 12 tribes then are assigned different regions in the land. And it's correlated to the medicine of the tribe and the totem of the tribe and why they end up where they end up. And again, it's a lot of detail, but there's a power to these directions that they are being called to occupy. So just a raise of hands, how many of you have never seen that before? And how many are like, whoa, that's mind-blowing? Yeah, I think it's mind-blowing too. And it reminds us of the tribal nature of our ancestry, the place-based nature of our ancestry, and the orientation to the powers that are being articulated that we can understand the world. And for me, it brings up grief, honestly, about the loss of that. And that we now have to relearn that as a scattered people. And that is a deep inquiry. Well, how do I, as a Jewish person who comes from, this old tribal format, how do I then orient to, the land and the directions in California? Well, in some ways it's easier in California because the ocean's to my left when I'm facing north, and the rain stopped a week ago, just like in the land of Israel, Palestine. And so if you're in New York, like Gewalt, it's more challenging. Or if you're in Australia, even more challenging again, because it's upside down. So these are issues to contend with. But again, the core message is, let us as human beings be inspired by our ancestry to connect to place and the powers around us. And now I turn to some of our traditions that are alive today. The Arba Minim, the 4 species used on Sukkot. What do we do with the 4 species? We wave them in the 4 directions. We face the east and wave them to the east and to the south and to the west and the north and the sky and the earth and hold them in the center. So we are activating the 4 directions in our current real-time Jewish reality. It is here. You might say, that we are somehow called upon to continue the shamanic traditions, that have an orientation to the sacred powers. And I'm wondering if you have, is there anything else that you are like, oh, there's this other piece that I see in Judaism that is about this orientation to the 4 directions, the 4 winds and the powers. Does anything else come to mind? Okay, well, I have one more trick up my sleeve before we have to close. And that is the very center of the center of the center of the tradition. Which prayer would you say is the center of the tradition? Pat?
Shema?
The Shema. Okay, I mean, it's like, we know that the Shema is the central prayer. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Listen, all is one. Well, let me take you into the Shema for a moment. The blessing that precedes the Shema, the second blessing that precedes the Shema, is called the Ahava Rabbah. It says, Ahava Rabbah Avtanu. A great love. With a great love, you are loved. Whoops. Go back. Sorry. And there's this whole paragraph, and this is the paragraph that immediately precedes the 6 words of the Shema. And towards the bottom, there's this line in Hebrew, Vahavi enu l'shalom me'arba kanfot haaretz, which translates to, and bring us peace from the 4 corners of the earth. And the tradition is to wrap the 4 tzitzit, the fringes of our garments, to gather the 4 corners of the earth. Now, my chidush, my insight, personally, so this is my personal Torah now, the Torah, what I just gave you is sort of what the tradition is offering us, but my chidush is that the talis that we wear and the tzitzit, which are fringes on the 4 corners, and there's powerful symbolism inside the tzitzit, but that they represent these 4 winds. It's so deep in our tradition. It shows up right here in our talis, in our prayer garment. And then every time before we say the central prayer, we gather those 4 powers and wrap them symbolically to remind us. And in my practice, when I say the Shema, I have the talis, I call each of the 4 directions and I face that direction. I do this in Wilderness Torah ceremony. And I wrap each tzitzit, each fringe individually until they're all 4 together, and I have the unity, the oneness that the Shema is teaching us from the 4 corners. It is both acknowledging those sacred powers and connecting me to those sacred powers. And that is right there at the very heart of the tradition. And I know, Malka, I'm just about out of time, but I got to do this last little piece. Bear with me, friends. And then in the evening time, we remember the archangels, and we sing them in an evening song. It's the nigun I began with, if you were there. And the Midbar Rabbah takes these 4 angels, Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and tells us where they are. You know, that Michael's on the right to the south, corresponding to Ruvain, and Uriel's on the left, corresponding to the tribe of Dan in the north. Gabriel's in front of us. And that these 4 powers, are surrounding us. And then the Siddur gives us a paradoxical alternative description, tells us that, in fact, that Michael's on the right and Gabriel's on the left and Uriel's in front of Raphael. If you see, actually, Gabriel and Uriel were switched in these 2 different versions. So again, like, there is not a right answer, but we are being told twice, once by the Midrash and once by our own prayer book, that every night we are to remember the 4 powers that are embodied in the four angels and sing to them because they watch over us. And with that, I'm going to pause and just say this is the four winds, and this is our the Jewish birthright, to relate to the four winds and the four powers and the four elements and the four angels and the mystical visions of our prophets, as well as to renew those with our own personal experience. So may it be that way in our lives. And let us say,
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selig. Just a couple announcements as we close out today. My name is Malka again, Wilderness Tours Logistics and Community Programs Manager, and just want to say how grateful I am being in virtual community with you.
I mean, it's incredibly impressive. It's like, it's like my first thought is like, what? Like, I mean, it's great.
It's
Very exciting.
We have a very special thing. What can I tell you? I mean, he loves what Hadar stands for. You know, he and I have some very deep something, and those two things come together, you know.
Again, all of our sessions are being recorded. They're on our Facebook live stream on Wilderness Tours Facebook page. And as well, they'll be posted on our website about a week or so after every session and live stream. We have some really amazing sessions for the rest of this week and next week. Tomorrow, we're going to have Organic Torah, the Torah of Nature and the Nature of Torah with Rabbi Natan. And next week, we're going to have lots of creativity and embodiment practices, qigong, improvisational singing, nature art making, and more teaching.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to let folks in.
Okay.
With Rabbi Zelig as we prepare for Lag BaOmer. Stay tuned for a newsletter. It comes out every week. I believe this week's will come out today. It states more details about all of our upcoming Virtual Village programming, and you can always check out our Facebook and Instagram for more updates. I'll insert as well our web links and donation page, again, if you feel called to.
Morty, I'm going to wait a couple minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I think let's give some people just a couple minutes to enter the room, and then we'll get started. Welcome, everyone.
Just thank you so much to Rabbi Zelig. These sessions every Thursday are Wilderness Tours resident hours, where we really dive deep into the foundations and teachings of what makes Wilderness Torah who we are, and an anchor in earth-based Judaism and all of our principles and our teachings that create such aliveness when we gather in the wilderness and come together as a community. So please join us every Thursday to learn more about these foundations and about these. Really epic teachings. So just a huge thank you to the wisdom and spirit of Rabbi Zelig. And I'll pass it to you for any closing words, and that'll be it for today.
All right. Well, again, thank you to Sarah Elise and to Malka de Alma and Ilana for holding sessions. A lot of work is going into this, and just gratitude to the three of you and the many others behind the scenes. And thank you everyone for coming. Please use that source sheet, and we'll just close with one round of the Nigun of Bashem Hashem, just to remind us, that right now, even in our common singing,
Whenever you're ready, Rupshai.
Okay, great. Thank you. Morty, I'm only seeing you, right? Not, is that the way it's
are embedded culturally in our lives.
If you click on, you should see the source sheet.
Okay, what about seeing these lovely people? Ah, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, if you click on those dots, I'm gonna spotlight your video.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope.
Thank you.
That you are all safe and well. We are going to dive in today to Psalm 137, better known to Jews as either Al Naharot Bavel or By the Waters of Babylon. And my goal is really to
Lehitraot, until we meet again. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.
fold. I mean, as always, I want to do kind of a close literary and theological reading of this text, but also in light of the very startling conclusion of this psalm, startling and disturbing to many, to, if we have some time, talk a little bit about the place of vengeance, or I should say that to talk about the place or the lack of place for vengeance and anger in a spiritual life. Before I say absolutely anything at all, we're going to read it. I just want to preface it with only one sentence. And that is Richard Clifford, who I've quoted several times before over these weeks. Clifford, who is a Bible scholar and a Semiticist, characterizes this psalm beautifully. He says, Psalm 137 has the distinction of having one of the most beloved opening lines and the most horrifying closing line of any psalm. And as I say, part of what I want to do is wrestle with a little bit the sheer disturbingness of that closing line. Could I possibly, Shoshana, are you on the call? Would you be willing to read Hebrew while I translate the JPS? Are you on this? Shoshana Zucker, are you there? Okay, if you're not there, then sorry, let me try again. Judith Cates, are you on the call? Okay, I might have to do this myself because people don't appear to be answering me. Okay.
Oh, Shoshana is there. You should be able to unmute yourself. Here, I can also unmute you.
Okay, great.
You are
Thank you.
unmuted.
Okay.
I'm muted. Okay, let me just get a book. It's easier than the screen.
Shoshana, you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, I think. So why don't you get started with
Okay, I'm
Kuflamet
gonna
Zion?
start. Yeah. Okay. Al naharot Bavel, Sham yashavnu gam bachinu bizochrenu et Zion.
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept as we thought of Zion.
Al aravim betocha talinu kinorotenu.
There, on the poplars, we hung up our lyres.
Ki sham sha'alunu shovenu divrei shir v'tolalenu simcha shiru ladunai meshir Tzion.
Shirulanu Mishir Tzion.
Shiru lanu again.
For our captors asked us there for songs, our tormentors for amusement. Sing us one of the songs of Zion.
Eik nashir et shir Adonai al admat nechar.
How can we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil?
Im eshachech Yerushalayim tishkach yimini.
If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither.
Tibak lishoni lekechi im lo ezkerechi im lo e'ele et Yerushalayim al rosh simchati.
Let my tongue stick to my palate if I cease to think of you, if I do not keep Jerusalem in memory even at my happiest hour.
Zuchor Adonai livnei Edom et yom Yerushalayim ha'omrim aru aru ad yasod ba.
Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they cried, strip her to her very foundations.
Bat Bavel hashduda ashrei sheyishalem lach et gmulech shegamalt lanu.
Fair Babylon, you predator, a blessing on him who repays you in kind what you have inflicted on us.
Ashrei she'ochez v'nipat et olelecha al sela.
A blessing on him who seizes your babies and dashes them against the rocks. Okay. So thank you, Shoshana. So first, this, as you may know, is often recited on Tisha B'Av, as is already attested in Masechet Sofrim, and traditionally, at least, it is associated with, it is recited before Birkat HaMazon on weekdays, although my impression is that it is very rare that people actually do this. I once spent about a month asking about just about everybody I knew who was observant in any way, whether they did this or whether they grew up in places where they did this. And the only real consistent yeses I got were in modern Orthodox camps in North America during the summer. It's, I think, quite rare. But by the way, part of the power of saying Shir Hamalot on Shabbat comes from the juxtaposition between saying Al Naharot Bavel about exile during the week and then saying Shir Hamalot about return from exile on Shabbat. The return from exile on Shabbat has slightly less power, I think, as the juxtaposition has fallen away. This is, quite obviously, a lament for Jerusalem, and that makes it the great exception to what we've talked about multiple times, which is the rule that the Psalms do not reveal their historical context, right? This is a case where, at least on some level, the context, the historical context is clear, though, as we'll see, perhaps a tiny bit less clear than one might initially think. Some think it was written shortly after the Judeans were deported by the Babylonians. And yet, in its final form, it seems to be post-exilic. They seem to have returned. One thing that is often marshaled as evidence of that is the comment in verse 1 that by the waters of Bavel, Sham Yashavnu, there we sat, as opposed to, let's say, Kan Yashavnu, which would suggest perhaps that this psalm is post-exilic. That is to say, it's people who have just recently returned. What we can say, I think, pretty definitively is that this is a psalm by people for whom the memory of exile is painfully, almost searingly fresh, right? Whether they're still there or whether they have come back, the experience is very much real to them. And I think it's fair to say that most academic scholars see this psalm as composed shortly after the exile has come to an end. You know, people who think it was during the exile try all kinds of things. Robert Alter, for example, tries to say that Sham is just a way of expressing how alienated they feel in Babylonia, that they can't even call the place that they are here. They can only call it there. That strikes me as, I must say, rather forced. It is perhaps worth noting that there are a couple of places in Tanakh where it appears that Jerusalem is referred to as Sham by a psalmist who is pretty unambiguously in Jerusalem. So I guess one could say, which would make this whole drama around this question somewhat less exciting, one could make the argument that Sham simply can mean here in certain circumstances. Okay, that's a bit of an anticlimactic explanation, but be that as it may, okay? This, by the way, is also what I meant by saying even this is not so clear as an exception to the undatability rule. We know it's about the exile, but we don't actually know when it was written and in terms of what time, in terms of what kind of chronological relationship to the exile. Okay, so now just a couple of things about structure before we go verse by verse. First, I just think one way it may be useful to think about this, just as we work our way through it. The first 4 verses appear to be about grief in the first person plural. The second 2 verses, that is verses 5 and 6, appear to be about remembering, and they are in the first person singular. That is, the shift is to I from we. And then verses 7 to 9, in what feels like a shift to many, are this kind of dramatic expression of rage and a thirst for revenge. I think you can argue that verses 5 and 6, known to many Jews from many different settings, Imesh Kachechi, Yerushalayim, etc., are the kind of conceptual core of what this poem is about. They link, as it were, they serve as a bridge between the grief of the first 4 verses and the rage and desire for revenge of the last 3 versions. Last 3 verses, sorry. Now, something that I want to just mention here, and then we'll see if perhaps this emerges any more when we learn it and when people comment. And let me remind you that if you have questions that you want me to get to at the end, please put them in the chat box with a Q in front of them, so a capital Q, so I can find them more easily. I think one of the things that's also worth keeping in mind here is the way that memory forms an act of resistance here. Remembering Jerusalem is an act of the powerless in resisting the degradation of them at the hands of the powerful. The temple is in ruins, Jerusalem has been utterly devastated, and yet these captors who have destroyed the very center of Jewish life cannot control the inner world of their victims. And I think that that's actually really fundamental to the spirituality, and I think it's no exaggeration to say the ethics of this psalm as well. Memory here as almost a kind of weapon is worth acknowledging here, a weapon of resistance. Okay. So starting from the beginning, Morty, is there a reason why this time I can't see anybody but my screen? Am I doing something wrong this week? I see now. Okay, I figured it out. I'm sorry. Okay. Al Naharot Bavel. Sham yashavnu gam bachinu v'zochrenu et Zion. The thing that I would like to do here as an opening is to show just how much more complex this verse is than you might at first be tempted to think. This verse is extraordinarily subtle, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. So Babylon, in contrast to Israel, which is watered by rainfall, Babylon is watered essentially by irrigation canals. And in light of that, Robert Alter, for example, thinks that rather than translating by the rivers of Babylon, we might better translate by the streams of Babylon. Now, okay, none of that is all that exciting yet. But what is exciting and fascinating is a comment that, if I recall, Alter picks up on, but that it comes from the Israeli scholar Shimon Bar Efrat, who has written an extremely interesting essay about this psalm. Bar Efrat points out that the word Zion, Zion, sounds like the word Siyah, meaning dryness, and Sion, meaning dry place. And so Bar Efrat suggests that the contrast in this text between Sion and Bavel is also a contrast between a place that is associated with irrigation and flowering on the one hand, and a place that is associated with dryness on the other. Meaning that arguably from a perspective of their material, physical existence, Babylonia was actually quite appealing. Al Naharot Bavel Sham Yashavnu. We sat by the watercourses of Bavel. Yet, nevertheless, Zion, despite its dryness, the memory of it weighed more powerfully on us. In other words, rather than just saying, oh, we sat in Bavel and we, longed for Jerusalem, what Bar Efrat points out is that if you're paying attention to the sounds here, you have a far more subtle statement. We were in Bavel. Bavel was in many ways quite seductive, and yet nevertheless, we held on to our memories of Zion. Now, Bar Efrat also notes, and this I think is quite astute, that part of the problem is when we sing this song, whether in Hebrew or in English or whatever, we always translate Sham Yashavnu Gam Bachinu. There we sat, and we translate Gam as and or also. There we sat and also cried. However, he points out that sometimes in biblical Hebrew, Gam can mean but. If you look in your source, the second source I gave you, Psalm 129:2, Rabat sararuni minu urai, gam lo yachluli. Since my youth they have assailed me, but they have been unable to overcome me. And if that's the case, this is even more powerful. By the streams of Babylon, there we sat, but also cried. Not we sat and cried, which suggests no ambivalence, but rather we were there, but we continue to miss Jerusalem terribly. Now, one of the things I think is interesting, I'm not sure we can resolve this, but I think it's worth thinking about, is whether what he is remembering here and in verses 5 and 6 is Jerusalem in all its glory or Jerusalem in its horrible devastation. And what difference does that make in how you hear the psalm? Or is it both? Is it actually remembering, the most painful thing you can do is remember New York City at its glory and remember New York City the day after 9/11, right? Remembering both at the same time. But I think it is an interesting question that is not obvious. What is it exactly that he is, what kind of image of Jerusalem is it that he primarily has in mind? Now, what comes up immediately is the way that the captors, those who have captured a whole bunch of the people of Judea, demand music from them, but rather than sing, all they can do is cry. And in fact, very movingly, they hang up their instruments and refuse to make music. Almost as if to say, joy is inconceivable to them outside of being in God's presence and in the presence of God's temple. So if you look at verse 2, Al aravim betocha talinu kinorotenu, there on the poplars we hung up our lyres. Poplars, which are like willows, grow along the canals in Babylonia. And verse 3 is really the beginning of the taunting. Kisham sha'alunu shovenu, because there our captors demanded of us, could be asked of us, probably demanded of us, divrei shir. They wanted us to sing for them. This may remind some of you of things you've probably seen or read of Nazi guards asking Jews to dance. This is the same kind of idea, right? We've taken you captive. We've destroyed your whole world. Now sing for us. And as if asking them to sing weren't badly enough, they asked them to sing a very special thing. Shiru lanu mishir Tzion. Sing us a song of Zion. So now let's say a couple of things about this. So songs of Zion, Shir Tzion, is a slightly elusive phrase. It is not, I think, entirely clear what this refers to. It may refer to specific psalms about the temple. You can look later if you're interested, for example, at Psalm 46 and 48. It may refer to psalms about pilgrimage. You could look at Psalm 84 and the Shir HaMa'alot beginning in 120 and going to 134. Or it may very well be that the Babylonians are simply asking, sing us your native songs. It's not really clear what Shir Tzion is. How religious is the content that they're asking for? And in light of that, how mocking of God, as opposed to just the human captives that they've taken? I think that's a hard question. By the way, we actually have a relief, a bas relief from Sancherib's palace in Nineveh, which shows 3 captives playing a lyre while an Assyrian soldier stands over them. This is some kind of deeply etched memory of being traumatized that they clearly have. And, like in many Psalms, I think probably the thing we ought to be thinking about is, to what extent does what the enemy, which we've talked about a lot as a category, to what extent is what the enemy says so painful because it echoes a voice inside of the psalmist that he's not quite able to vocalize himself? In other words, to what extent does the external torment reflect or mirror some inner torment? Okay, now, to just stay with these verses for one more second, the phrase you may have noticed I kind of ignored was tol aleinu, which JPS translates as our tormentors. The Israeli Bible scholar Meir Gruber actually thinks here, interestingly, that tol aleinu is a play where the tuf and the shin are interchangeable, so that the real word here is shol aleinu, those who plunder us. This, by the way, is how the Targum understands here. Why then, Gruber wonders, is tol aleinu chosen rather than shol aleinu? Because tol aleinu creates a magnificent wordplay with talinu in verse 2. So we hung up talinu, but our tolalim attacked us with that. Gruber has to be right because he learned philology from Moshe Held, therefore he's correct. Pasuk Daled, that was an attempt at humor, unsuccessful. Okay, Pasuk Daled. This is what they ask, Eich nashir et shir Hashem al admat nechar, a verse familiar to many of you, no doubt. How can we possibly sing a song of Hashem on alien soil? Now here, I want you to please remember what I just said about how it's hard to know what Shir Tzion means. But depending on what Shir Tzion means, that will shape how we hear what they are saying when they say we can't sing Shir Hashem. Meaning, is Shir Hashem a way of saying, oh, what they were asking us for is songs about the temple or songs about pilgrimage to the temple? And so mocking us for that is a form of mocking God? Or might it be that Shir Tzion refers to any old Judean song, but the people's experience is that any degradation of them is a degradation of their God? Right? That on some level it's indistinguishable for them. You know, this is true for religious communities throughout their history. The sort of narrative, the psychological experience, if nothing else, often it's more than psychological merely, but the psychological experience is if you mock us, you're directly assaulting God. We find this a lot in Tanakh. Okay. Now, verses 5 and 6, we have famously an oath, never to forget Jerusalem, and an invocation on the one who vows, that is to say, if I do X or don't do X, then let Y happen to me, is the Bible's most vehement way of expressing kind of unbridled commitment. I am absolutely committed to this. Nothing can shake this commitment. Now, what does this mean? Tishkach yemini. If I forget Jerusalem, let my right hand forget. The thing that's odd about this, now this is an example of a verse that is so familiar to many people. Some people, begin to hear songs they learned in like second grade or something, right? That it's easy to no longer hear that the Hebrew is odd. That tishkach, you would expect a direct object. That is to say, yemini tishkach X. What is it that my right hand will forget? Now, JPS decides to go with wither. Mark Bretler suggests become useless or paralyzed. But the thing is that tishkach is nowhere else in Tanakh, if I'm not mistaken, used as an intransitive verb, which is why the King James already inserted the words which are not there. It's cunning. Let my right hand forget, it's cunning. But tishkach yemini simply means let my right hand forget. Its cunning is taken to be an implicit, like a tacit object. Some people suggest that this is so odd that if you only change the letters around and change tishkach to tichash, that would mean to wither. From the root kaf chet shin, let my right hand wither. Maybe JPS is implicitly doing that, but I doubt it. Not sure. Others insist, look, we have no other case where it is an intransitive verb, but maybe this shows that it can function as an intransitive verb. And the reason you might use it without you might use it intransitively, even though you don't normally do that, is it's an amazing wordplay. Im eshkachech Yerushalayim, tishkach yemini. Just one last thing here. Sorry for the Hebrew geeking out, as we might say. That Shimon Bar Efrat suggests that maybe we should vocalize tishakach yemini, which would mean to become paralyzed and lose the ability to feel it. All of this is fine Hebrew-wise, but I want to make sure you grasp the image here, because I don't think it's obvious to most readers. When he then goes on to say, Tibak b'shoni lechiki, let my tongue stick to my palate, that is, let me become unable to utter a sound. So think about this for a minute. As Radak points out magnificently, they've just described themselves as musicians who refuse to play. And then the image is, if I forget Jerusalem, let two things basically fall apart. My ability to play a string instrument with my hand and my ability to sing with my mouth. let all of my musical creativity be destroyed. It's a very beautiful image, which I think is non-obvious. It is, in the words of one modern rabbi Bible scholar, the greatest curse that a musician could possibly utter against himself, right? Let me become effectively musically paralyzed. I can't play, I can't sing. Bar Efrat adds, I think, supplementally, that if you think about it, the hand and the mouth together are what you need in order to take a vow. So I'm taking this vow that if I forget, if I let Jerusalem sink from my memory, fade from my memory, then may the very things that I'm using in declaring this essentially be ruined. I have to say, I find Radak's interpretation more beautiful. I'm not sure which is pshat, and they may not be mutually exclusive. And then comes the last verses 7 to 9. And here, I think it gets slightly harder to begin to make sense of. So let's just sort of think about these verses. So first, I think it's important to understand here how verse 7 begins. Zechor Hashem livnei Edom. Remember, O God, for the Edomites, or to the Edomites. And what I think is important to say here is that just as Israel commits to remembering Jerusalem, God is invited to remember those who destroyed it. There's some kind of request for a mutuality in memory. We'll remember Jerusalem if you remember those who utterly, knocked it down to the ground. Context here, which maybe I shouldn't have given you sources. The Edomites joined the Babylonians in the attack that destroyed Jerusalem. For this, I invite you to read the first chapter of the prophet Ovadiah, which no doubt everyone on this call knows by heart. And when you're done with Ovadiah, read Sephaniah and then call me. You see that in Ovadiah. You also see that mentioned in Yechezkel on a couple of occasions. We'll say more about that in a minute. The movement that this represents in a minute, as we'll see, Zechor Hashem livnei Edom, remember God, what these Edomites did, is a movement, I think, from sadness and grief to rage. This is sort of on some level an obvious point, but it's important in sort of mapping out the mood that this chooses to give voice to. And then, please notice something that is Zionism at its most subversively beautiful reading of tradition. What is it that God is supposed to remember? God is supposed to remember Yom Yerushalayim. Now, the phrase Yom Yerushalayim in Psalm 137 refers to the day when Jerusalem was destroyed. Only the psalmist can't bring himself to say that, so he just calls it Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day. That is the day when Jerusalem was destroyed utterly by its enemies. When Israelis refer to the day, I'm here not talking about politics. That is the last thing from my mind right now. When Israelis, after 1967, talk about Yom Yerushalayim, they are dramatically inverting the biblical image, where Yom Yerushalayim goes from being the day when Jerusalem was destroyed to the day when, as it were, was right. The as it were, I hope is clear, was rebuilt, or if you prefer more politically and accurately, recaptured, reunited, whatever you want to say. But in other words, the use of the phrase Yom Yerushalayim in that way by Israelis is a very fascinating midrash on the way it's used in this verse. Now, here, also notice in their evocation of Edom, the vehemence and the hatred that is expressed by the Edomites. And here, I think you really have to read it. You'll forgive me if I do a slightly dramatic reading. Ha'omrim, who said, Aru, Aru, strip her, ad hayesod ba, all the way down to the very foundation, right? That they didn't just destroy Jerusalem, they did it with hatred and vengeance. This is very important because it will help explain psychologically, I think, the degree of the call for vengeance on Israel's part, on the Israelites' part, the Judeans. Okay, now, there is here. It's worth mentioning that in the prophet Ovadiah, it becomes clear that sorry, I shouldn't say it becomes clear. It seems from the prophet Ovadiah that Edom betrayed its allies in what was supposed to be a massive collective revolt against Babylonia. And Edom ended up siding with Babylonia. And it was not only the cruelty of siding with Babylonia, but also turning on its own allies. Okay, so that's verse 7. So these disloyal traitors who relished the idea of destroying Jerusalem, remember them, God, remember that what they did. And then kind of the slippage between Edom and Bavel, Bat Bavel Hasheduda. JPS translates, fair Babylon, you predator. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, because that's not a great rendering of the Hebrew. Ashrei she'yishalem lach, a blessing on him who repays you, et gmulech shegamalt lanu, who does to you what you did to us, one who pays you midah kineged midah, measure for measure. Now, hashidudah is a problem, because hashidudah does not mean predator, it means preyed upon. Bat Bavel Hashidudah literally would seem to mean fair Babylon, you who are prey. So, okay, so there's a few possibilities here. One is that you could amend the text by simply moving one letter and read this as Bat Bavel Hashodeda. Shodeda would mean predator. Shedudah would mean preyed upon, as I said. Unless, and I have to say, in my general reluctance to amend anything unless we really have to, it is possible that Hashedudah is the text's way of saying it's as good as done already. O Babylon, you who are destroyed. You're not destroyed, but you're as good as destroyed. Right? The confidence that God's vengeance will be wrought against them leads to a description whereby it's it is still very much it is, we are totally confident that is going to happen. Please also notice, I am completely obsessed with the word plays in Tehillim. Ashrei she'yishalem is an amazing play on Yerushalayim. Ashrei she'yishalem is that has to be intended. Ashrei she'yishalem is Yerushalayim. Okay. Et mulech shegamalt lanu. Now, and then comes verse 9, which, to go back to where I started, you have here the verse that Clifford refers to as one of the most, disturbing, if not the most disturbing verses in the Bible. Ashrei sheyochez v'nipetz et olalaych, a blessing on him who seizes your babies and dashes them el hasela, on the rock. Okay, now, let me say something really small and then zoom out to say something somewhat larger. One is, again, to return to Bar Efrat. Bar Efrat wants to know why the phrase is here napatz, as opposed to what you would expect in biblical Hebrew, which is ratash. And he suggests that if you look at Jeremiah chapter 5, you will see that Babylonia is described as having no pates, its enemies. And that therefore what is going on here is shattering them, just as, let me say it this way, just as Babylon shattered nations and kingdoms and everyone in them, so also will her littlest children be shattered in return. I'm not suggesting that you should say like, oh, that makes sense, that's perfect. I'm just saying that may be the logic here, that there's a kind of midah kineged midah imagined here. Now, one more comment on this before we talk about the larger issue of vengeance. Why the mention of the rock? Well, first of all, just notice that at the risk of overreading, that a rock generally suggests dryness. So notice the contrast with how we began talking about Naharot Bavel, and then Bavel will be destroyed, and the place that was known for its irrigation and its wetness will have become completely dried out. Babylon was characterized by kind of an abundance of water, and now it is barren. Another possibility is that Al-Hasela is a pun, whereby the rock, which is what the fortress city of Edom was known by in Melachim Bet. The problem with that is we appear to be talking here about Bavel and not Edom. On the other hand, on the third hand, there's some slippage between Bavel and Edom here, so maybe it refers to Edom and Bavel. As John Levinson points out, to whoever composed Psalm 137, the difference between Babylonians and Edomites was immaterial, right? They're basically, whether it was the Babylonian suzerains or their Edomite confederates, they're all enemies and they're all guilty for their incredible cruelty and the barbaric destruction of Jerusalem that they engaged in. Now, the question is, and I'm not planning to remotely pretend to solve this, what do you make of a verse like this? I mean, praying for the destruction of babies on a rock, banging babies' heads on rocks, is not exactly, pretty biblical religion. So I want to say a couple things. One is that some Bible scholars, and understandably, basically say, look, this is indefensible. Maybe you could understand the background of the suffering that people were feeling, but stuff like this does not belong. And yet, I think it's worth saying, regardless of whether you want to endorse this at this point, that it is a kind of pretty elemental human feeling that those who rob others of a future should be robbed of a future themselves. And on some level, that does appear to be the sentiment, the raw, kind of unexpurgated, uncensored emotion that is expressed here. Let those people who robbed us of a future have no future themselves. Now, some scholars do something that I have to say, I understand why they think it makes it better, but it also arguably makes it worse. They say, look, it's not personal desire for revenge. It's out of zeal for God and God's place. Zeal for God in the Beit HaMikdash. Well, that may very well may be true, but the truth is, in the history of the world, people who said, I'm not going to kill you because of what you did to me, but I'm going to kill you because of what you did to God, often find themselves licensed to do more unfathomably horrific things than they did if they were just taking revenge for themselves. Meaning, I understand why some scholars might want to make it better by saying, oh, it's zeal for God, but zeal for God has, littered human history with a lot of corpses. So I'm not sure that solves our problem if we feel we have one, as much as it maybe explores more some of what might be at play here. Now, there is another theme in modern biblical scholarship that I want to just introduce. I have to say, I'm still not totally persuaded that it's right, but it's very common. What a variety of biblical scholars argue, and they tend to be liberal Protestant biblical scholars, is that in cries for vengeance in biblical texts, what you essentially have is the psalmist handing over his desire for vengeance to God, such that that allows him not to want to do it himself. Like, oh God, you rip their head off, which means I don't have to. And thereby I'm handing off my most violent impulses and my most raging feelings to you for you to do with as you will. I have to be honest that while that view is held by quite a number of extremely sophisticated and respectable scholars, feels a little apologetic to me, especially about a verse like this one. When you say, Ashrei she'yochez v'nipetzet ol alayich, seems like an odd thing to say about God. Ashrei seems like something you say almost always, if not always. Someone who knows Tanakh B'kiyut better than I do can tell me whether they think I'm wrong about this. But Ashrei seems to refer to something you would say about a person who does something. Osharab, Ashrei means Oshar, ha'osher shel. Ashrei, the delight of one who does this. Somehow that feels to me that it's talking about a person doing it. Now, you could, I guess, say, yes, but fantasy is not the same thing as acting. You know, if fantasy were the same as acting, lots of people in their therapist's office would have committed murder, and it's not murder, it's fantasy. And maybe that's okay as a way of processing rage. Not sure, but I think it's worth mentioning. This is argued again, as I say, by quite a few people. Okay, want to say maybe one other thing here. Well, I don't think that, as I want to underscore again, I don't think this solves it, but I think that the logic of the turn from verse 8 to verse 9 suggests here that we have, what Bible scholars sometimes refer to as the nexus between action and its consequence. You destroyed us, and your gmul should be, we destroy you. And what better way do we have to destroy you than essentially by saying, you will biologically have no future. It becomes slightly less terrifying if who's being spoken of here is not Babylonians in general, but Babylonia's king. I'm not, again, I don't really know what to say about that. I gave you on your source sheet, at least I meant to, is it there? I gave you some excerpts from modern biblical scholars. You can scroll down all the way, Mordia, thank you. So one thing that I did want to just draw your attention to, and then I'm going to turn to some of the questions people have probably posted. One thing that Walter Brueggemann points out about this psalm and others like it that I do think is helpful to say is that the spirituality of the Psalms is deeply committed to refusing to censor what human beings feel in their relationship with God and their relationship with the world in light of their relationship with God. And I've talked before here, I think, about how Brueggemann talks about how one of the things that's important about lament is if you're not willing to protest God when God seems to act unjustly, you will likely not be willing to protest human injustice either. That either you speak up or you don't. That there's something, that's Brueggemann's argument at least. He has a very influential essay called The Costly Loss of Lament, where he basically talks about how he thinks one of the consequences to the Christian churches of not really engaging with lament is it makes people more politically passive. Whether that's right or that's not, I'm not sure, but it's a fascinating argument. What he argues also is, and it's very much related, a book of Psalms where you were not allowed to express your fantasy of vengeance is a book of Psalms that would again be committed to censoring you in the name of some kind of piety that thwarts a full encounter with your feelings. And that, in fact, it's important for a text to give voice to this kind of feeling. I don't know what you want to do with that. I think that it may simultaneously be true, and the text nevertheless remains dangerous. Now, I gave you some passages of people who think that this is about handing over vengeance to God. And I gave you a couple of passages, one from Erich Zenger, who's written on the Psalms of Vengeance. Zenger basically says, look, these are not just Psalms about fantasy of revenge. These are the Psalms of the powerless. And powerless people fantasize about having power to do horrible things when they're destroyed by others. That's just sort of how it works. The danger, I would say, this is me, shy talking, is what happens when people who have power then go on reciting Psalms of powerlessness as if nothing has changed. This is true, I think, in general about some of the great challenges philosophically that religious Zionism has largely avoided wrestling with, which what happens when you try to translate ideas that come from periods of powerlessness into periods of great power. You know, talking about the superiority of Jews when you're Yehuda Halevi and you're defending yourself against Christians and Muslims who point out your inferiority, that's different than in a yeshiva where you're going to leave the yeshiva and drive a tank the next week. Here, again, I'm not particularly talking here about political. I mean, it is political, of course, but I'm saying contextual interpretation really matters quite a bit, I think. One thing that I wanted to just draw your attention to is that the last passage I gave you is from an essay by John Levinson, in which he argues, I think quite interestingly, that you can look at these sources later. I wasn't planning on going through them in the session. Is that he effectively argues when people say, oh, Psalms like this are a very powerful way of putting down one's anger by handing it to God, he says, you know, kind of quite the contrary. Psalms like this are a way of nurturing anger and keeping it going. Let's not allow ourselves any, easy liberal answers. Oh, well, it's like the fact is, like, do you think any Jew would be hating Amalek if it weren't for the fact that it was a mitzvah to talk about them? Right? So let's avoid kind of a facile way of making the text easier. So here, what I'm interested in doing here, as may be obvious by now, is not solving this problem. A, because I have no idea how to do it, and B, because that's not my method of reading and learning more generally. I guess what I do want to conclude by saying is I think you can find ways to say both things. That a liturgy, in order to be true to the range of human experience, and to have a certain vision whereby anything can be said to God when it's said with integrity, that the liturgy like that needs to allow a text like this, and that a text like this, you could argue, is potentially dangerous or explosive. Meaning, I think those two things are not actually mutually exclusive thoughts. One of the things that John Levinson also says in his essay is, look, with all due respect, nobody ever read this psalm and said, oh, I guess it's permissible for me to go find a baby and bash its head up on a rock, right? Nobody ever thought that. Obviously, there's a rhetorical performance here. I don't know, okay? I mean, there's obviously like a great deal you could say here. Okay, let me try to start scrolling through some of these questions. Okay, let's see.
Shai, I just chatted you a series of questions, so they should pop up right at the bottom.
You chatted me a series of questions. Amazing. Wait, you chatted them to me? I don't see them yet. Oh, I see. Wait. Are these from you? The one from Sarah and...
Some of them, yeah.
I'm not sure that I'm getting what you sent me here. I don't see it. Hold on. Let me try again. Please bear with me for 1 second, everybody.
All the way down in your chat.
Yeah, I don't see a thing from you. Oh, Soul Stage, I see. I got it. Thank you.
Oh,
hasn't
Jewish
communal memory always been our weapon in resisting attempts to assimilate or annihilate us as a people? So yeah, the response to that is yes, of course. And I think that it's interesting in anthropological studies of how memory works. It's not just us. And yet, I also think it's probably worth acknowledging that memory is a double-edged sword, in that memory can allow people to resist. It can also keep alive grudges that can't be put down. I mean, one of the things that made me become, I hope, less naive in my talking about the ethics of memory is as I reflect back on my own memories, I mean, obviously from here, not from there, of the genocide in Bosnia in the 90s, where in many ways those battles were about relitigating a battle that had taken place 500 years earlier, right? And by the way, after the genocide in Bosnia, even Elie Wiesel, who you could describe as a kind of apostle of memory in 20th century Jewish life, began to say, maybe I've been talking about memory in an insufficiently nuanced way. Just saying remember is way too simple. You have to talk about what kind of memory you're for. One of the things I talk about in my current book, which I hope will be published before the Messiah comes, is that that one of the central ethical tasks that we have is to take responsibility for the fact that we shape the memory that in turn shapes us, right? Memory doesn't just mean something, right? Having been slaves in Egypt tells me nothing about what my responsibilities are. I could conclude that therefore I can do whatever the heck I want to anyone I want, or I could conclude therefore I am morally responsible for everyone who's vulnerable. I shape the memory that shapes me. And we need to find much more sophisticated ways of talking about what it means to be a people oriented around memory. Jeffrey asks, is Talinu in verse 2 related to Tolalenu? I believe grammatically, no. Homiletically and wordplay wise, it's kind of magnificent. Alan asks, are Israelis aware of the irony? By that, I assume you meant of the Yom Yerushalayim. The answer to that is, I assume most Israelis are not aware of the irony because an awful lot of the ways that earlier cultural Zionists, for example, played with texts is lost on a lot of people. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm highly skeptical. Question from verse 2, can the verb be transitive if no direct object indicator et? I'm not sure I understand what that question is asking. In verse 2? Dan, feel free to type in and explain to me what you meant. I'm sorry if I'm missing it. Can the rock refer to God? I don't think God is very unlikely. The notion that you would shatter a baby upon God seems very like an implausible way of using that image biblically. Is the implication, Rachel asks, that someone who batches babies is God? The key word is gamal. Why would you say that that is God? I would say, on the contrary, that's actually my argument, is that that's why it's not about handing over to God. It's about imagining, I think, like, blessed is the one who does that, even if that's an expression of a fantasy rather than a plan. Against the rocks reminds me of the rock of Israel. Israel will survive. So I think that is, that's a late 20th century hearing of it, I think. I don't think that's okay. Question from Robert, does the psalm justify vengeance? And commentators sought to give it another more specific meaning. So good. So that's the question that I was asking, I think, in the last 15 minutes of the shiur. I guess the question that I might reframe is the psalm justifying vengeance or justifying longing for vengeance? And that really is, I think, in many ways, the core question here, at least as I'm reading it. It seems certainly to justify longing for vengeance. The question is whether it really justifies vengeance. You could read it that way, but I'm not sure that you need to, and that's precisely what's at stake. I think you've just given maybe a clearer way of getting at the question that I was raising. Ronnie says, those who chose a modern name likely understood the biblical reference. Yes, absolutely. Rachel also points out here, sorry, wait, let me look for more questions though, because I said I would do that. Did I get all the questions, Morty, as far as you can tell?
Most of them. I'll look over and see if there are more that I can find. So I guess I just want to point our attention in the last minute to something
Eliza, you posted a quote from Brueggemann, praying the Psalms. You can find that. She posted that at 3:52, where he calls the yearning for vengeance characteristically Jewish. I think now, I'm gonna, I don't love that I'm being recorded as I say this. Walter Brueggemann has a complicated relationship with Jews and I think, somewhat unhinged relationship with Israel. And I say that as someone who's fairly left. But I have to say, I'm not convinced that what he means to say here is meant to sound anti-Jewish at all. I think what he's trying to say here, is that biblical religion's great virtue in Brueggemann's, or one of biblical religion's great virtue in Brueggemann's understanding, is that it is not afraid of the ugliest, bloodiest feelings human beings have. And that precisely because of Judaism's and biblical Judaism's stubborn disworldliness, insistent disworldliness, it makes sense that among the various things that Judaism expresses is a desire for vengeance when people have hurt Jews that badly. It is possible that I'm being apologetic and reading him too generously here. I would prefer if he had used the word biblical rather than Jewish, which maybe is what set you, bothered you here. But I do suspect that that's what he means. Again, I might be wrong. Yeah. Okay, so it seems like you agree with what I was saying there. Okay. Rachel, the source sheet is, I think, linked at the very top of this sheet. I think that on Monday, we're going to try to work through Psalm 139, which is just a magnificently beautiful text. We're going to try to figure out the text that I'm going to argue is, at least in part, about ambivalence, about wanting God to be totally near and feeling just overwhelmed and suffocated by God's nearness. It's a really interesting spiritual text and can be read in so many different ways that I think it'll be fun for us to consider together. As always, thank you very much. Really prayers for everyone's safety and well-being, and an early Shabbat Shalom. Take care, everybody. Morty, if you could save people's comments, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
No problem.